I'm Chance Storland, and this is the In-Depth Podcast, an interview program from expressnews.com with in-depth reporting and other resources for stories affecting San Antonio and Bexar County. Many American cities with turn-of-the-century neighborhoods have a Euclid Street. And in San Antonio, new blood in the old neighborhood runs through much of Euclid Avenue, a 2-mile stretch of the city that mirrors much of its own past and progress. Gentrification pressures are bearing down on homes all along that street, pushing up sales prices and property taxes. And at one end, on West Euclid near I-10, small homes beckon young adults charmed by their character, the proximity to downtown, and the new rentals available there. While on the other hand, on East Euclid near the Pearl, they're seeing even bigger tax appraisals as developers tear down and transform neglected lots and structures into high-end multifamily communities and commercial properties. To learn more about all that on Euclid and all the different situations you'll find, I'm joined now by Express News staff writer René Guzman. So René, thank you for joining me here again on the In-Depth Podcast. Today's topic is rather different than those we normally cover here on the program. Let's start with your writing that's available now at expressnews.com, where you write that every major city has a Euclid Street. I haven't been to every major city, but I believe that because they're that common. So what made you write about San Antonio's Euclid Street?
Well, it's funny because it would be so easy to say it usually starts with an editor's idea. That was kind of the case here. My editor had seen, actually, it was just a kind of a random post on Facebook about someone kind of observing, hey, I noticed a Euclid Avenue here in San Antonio, and I, noticed a Euclid Avenue where I'm from, out of town, and it just kind of snowballed from there. And I think what kind of made it stick was that it is such a uncommon name for a common street, and I did do the Google Maps due diligence to see that there is indeed a Euclid in a lot of major and minor cities across the nation. So it kind of just turned into, okay, well, what does this Euclid show and tell, if you will, about San Antonio at large? And I'm happy to say, certainly for the sake of the story, it showed a lot.
You mentioned the name itself. Euclid is the name of the Greek mathematician Euclid of Alexandria, best known as the father of geometry. While laying out the then modern grid system, which is interesting, of course, grids related to math, around the turn of the century, city planners from Portland, Oregon to Portland, Maine would name a street for Euclid. So it looks like your research using Google Maps played out. How did San Antonio's version of this street come into being?
Well, the funny thing about San Antonio's Euclid, it wouldn't be San Antonio unless it kind of bucked the trend in a sense. And with San Antonio, the Euclid Street originally was named Macon Street. And even before then, going back to, well before the 1900s, it was simply 7th Street. Late 1800s, it becomes Macon Street, and it didn't become Euclid until 1914. And basically, it took the city having an ordinance to change street names. There was some confusion between Macon Street and Mason Street here in town. And back in the early 1900s, a lot of confusion between the two. At one point in 1914, there was a fire that was reported on Macon Street, but firefighters went to Mason instead by mistake. By the time they got back to Macon, there had been some pretty significant property damage. So it was as much about necessity as it was just, hey, let's find a fancier name for the street. Excuse me. So what the interesting thing is that as far as why Euclid, it would be easy to say, oh, hey, San Antonians like their Greek mathematicians as much as anyone. But it may very well have had to do a little more with how Euclid is also the name of a sequoia. And in the area where what is now Euclid runs, there are other streets named after trees, like cypress, laurel, other trees like that. There was, and I gotta say credit where credit is due as far as that idea, having that tree connection, with streets in the area known as laurel, myrtle, poplar. There was a librarian at San Antonio Conservation Society who kind of just threw that out there. She's like, I can't exactly say there's actual, documentation, but it sure looks like it's sort of trying to fit in with the other tree names in the area. So I'd like to think it's probably that more so than a love of the father of geometry, although I love my math too. So let's just celebrate both.
It'll be one of those histories that will forever be lost to the ages. We'll just have to say it could be one or the other. Talking about the street itself, Euclid, a lot can be found there. We're going to break down a lot of these different things throughout today's interview. But one thing you won't find a lot of are the original homes that are built there. Only around a dozen dot West Euclid Avenue. But the homes you do see there are priced well below the city's average sales price, which of course means it's attractive to millennials. And you spoke with one young person living there who says she feels more of her peers are also skipping the suburbs for homes closer to downtown that have some character. So what were you able to find out about the young inhabitants of Euclid?
Well, it was pretty fascinating to see this kind of juxtaposition. You see these old homes, and these are probably early 1900s bungalows, single-story homes. Some of them, look like they have been around for more than 100 years. Others, have been updated, at least with some fresh siding and paint. But but these homes, these look like, homes that I would go to, when I visit my grandmother, and certainly in the case of a lot of these millennials, when they would, if they knew their great grandparents. So to see such young inhabitants at these homes, and mostly renters at that, I found it fascinating. And talking to them, a lot of them basically said the same thing. It's just they really just love that these homes have such character, that they're so close to downtown. But I think mostly that they just seem to have that certain history of San Antonio, just that sense of deep roots, that sense of character, but also just I want to say fortitude. I mean, not be quite a stretch, but these are some pretty tough homes that have stood many tests of time, and it was really quite heartwarming to talk with these mostly millennial renters who really want to maintain that.
I like that. So as West Euclid holds on to what little fortitude it has left from its residential footprint, a mixture of old and newer homes, East Euclid marches on as a more changed and commercial-focused thoroughfare, including the nearby Pearl, which, of course, is a big hotspot for San Antonio. It rose from the ashes to become that culinary and arts area that it's known for now. So tell me about the roots of this success story for a different part of Euclid.
Well, looking at the other end of this road, East Euclid Avenue, as you get toward what's now the Pearl, what was then the Pearl was a 19th century brewery, and it had closed. I may be off here, but it was pretty sure it closed in just before 2000, late 1990s, 1980s, thereabout. And kind of like a lot of that side of town, it just had really deteriorated. There were talking to some of the residents there on East Euclid, who had been there, some of them going back to the early 1980s, had all told me the same thing. It's like, God, this area just used to be, quite frankly, a dump. It was very dilapidated. There were old business areas, like, whether they were lots or like hotels that had kind of just closed down and just become these, spots for vagrants and crime. And it just had really had gone downhill. And when the Pearl was purchased, that land was purchased, I want to say right around 2000, 2001. And all this investment goes into it. It becomes just this, just this culinary arts and culture hotspot. Becomes certainly a very big draw for millennials here in town, but it becomes a big draw for locals as well as visitors. And I mean, I can say this as a San Antonio native myself. I mean, up until the Pearl, people would only go downtown, maybe just to go downtown to the Riverwalk, to the Alamo. And then here's this near downtown hotspot, this must-see place. So with the rise of the Pearl in the early 2000s, basically people were like, you know what? I think we'd like to live around here. I think we want to do more than just visit. And consequently, you start seeing development. You start seeing all sorts of development, commercial, especially with condominiums, townhomes. But even some of the homeowners are also sometimes selling their homes, sometimes getting bought out. But for the most part, there just seems to be this renewed passion for living in that area. And I think it's as much on the business side in terms of investing in the properties and mostly empty lots as it is on a few of the residents there as well. I know one gentleman I talked to who had been there since '82, still lives there. He now rents out the back of his home as an Airbnb, and mostly for tourists who love going to the Pearl.
So speaking along the same lines, I opened our conversation today, René, talking about one of the competing forces taking place on Euclid. And it's, of course, a trend that many areas of the San Antonio metropolitan face, and that's gentrification. So like with any urban renewal, you've written that coupled with the increasing property values and taxes countywide, the success of East Euclid that you just mentioned threatens to push out long-time and low-income residents. The city council has even addressed this issue with public tax dollars. So what's been happening on that end of things on East Euclid?
Well, it's again, another part of how Euclid reflects a lot of San Antonio at large. Property taxes have been a very big bone of contention throughout San Antonio, especially this year. There are protests for tax appraisals probably like there have never been. And this is something that has been going on more often in recent years. But I think especially this past year. And yes, gentrification is happening all over San Antonio. The west side of the city is experiencing it, the east side as well. So it's not just on Euclid Avenue, but yeah, it is a concern. And yes, the city is very aware of the growing concerns about that, and recently had approved a $1 million plan, basically to help those who are struggling, either to remain in their homes, or maybe even those who have been forced out, due to redevelopment or to spikes in their rent. So yes, the city is very much aware of it, and I think it's a bit more reactive in what the city is, I think, trying to do right now. But it is something, and I think it does show that this is a very major concern for not just residents in general in San Antonio, but I think certainly for San Antonio government, that they want to make sure they can try to get some sort of some support, and the system, to be fair, does extend. It is to an extent out of the city's hands. I mean, this starts getting into state taxes and things like that goes beyond San Antonio proper. But the city itself, from residents to government, both very much aware of it, and I think both are trying to do the best they can to at least mitigate it the best they can.
So, René, in your write-up that once again is available now at expressnews.com, you kind of had this three-pronged attack. You had West, you had East, and then you have where East Euclid meets West at North Main Avenue. You have Texas classics like Luby's and Lulu's Bakery and Cafe that for years have operated near some of San Antonio's best-known gay bars, a juxtaposition that reflects the city's growing priority to balance the needs of the LGBTQ and business communities. So before we say goodbye, of course, I want to hear about this third area of Euclid.
Well, it was as I was driving up and down Euclid a lot for this story. I noticed, okay, here is a legacy homeowner at the very end of West Euclid, literally where the road ends at Interstate 10. Kind woman, just at peace with what's going on around her. The changes, as much as just a very diehard San Antonio presence on Euclid. Other end, East Euclid, certainly there's those commercial lots that are transitioning to something else, to something more. So in the middle of the road, so to speak, right around where East turns into West, around North Main Avenue, there have been several gay bars that have come and gone, and it's this particular intersection is down the road from probably the main, I want to say the main LGBTQ center of the city. Up on North Main Avenue, there is a rainbow crosswalk that was installed. I believe it was just last year. This is pretty much the heart of the LGBTQ district. With the city did this with private funds from the community. In 2013, the city passed an ordinance to prevent discrimination against anyone based on their sexual orientation and gender identity. San Antonio has just been a very vocal advocate for the LGBT community in recent years like it's never been before. And certainly this year has been no exception. There has been a lot of controversy about city council barring Chick-fil-A from the airport following one of the councilman's motions that he couldn't support a company that he referred to as, quote, as having, quote, a legacy of anti-LGBTQ behavior. So seeing this this juxtaposition at quite the literal crossroads of Euclid, going from east to west, also really represented a lot of the change going on in San Antonio for the better, for the LGBTQ community. Businesses that support them, businesses that really show their pride. And, this being Pride Month, you're going to see a lot of that up and down North Main Avenue around the area where Euclid crosses, as well as some of the other streets, because there are quite a few LGBTQ businesses along that avenue. But yeah, it has been such a positive thing to see, and seeing some of these dyed-in-the-wool Texas type businesses. You mentioned Luby's, Lulu's Cafe, Bakery and Cafe. For the longest time, more than a dozen years, one of the oldest gay bars in town, the Annex, was set up right across the street from the headquarters for Child Advocates San Antonio, which helps with abused foster children and helping train volunteers to support them. And they're sharing parking for all these years. The Annex actually recently moved in the midst of this reporting for the story to what used to be the spot of a previous gay nightclub, which is actually now on East Euclid near Lulu's. So it is, again, I think just that crossroads really is, I think, very emblematic of where the city has progressed in terms of its relationship with the LGBTQ community. It really is a positive, really quite great thing to see.
So obviously with the 2-mile stretch of Euclid in San Antonio, René, there's plenty of more stories to be told. That's about the amount of time we have, however, for today's episode. So I'm going to give you final thoughts.
Well, I got to say, for what was basically a 2-mile stretch of road, I was pleasantly surprised to see so much of San Antonio represented on this relatively short amount of pavement. It's again, as a San Antonio native, I love seeing how this city has grown in so many positive directions, and in so many different directions. For the longest time, there was this kind of urban sprawl that would just go toward the north side of San Antonio, and now there's more development on the east side. There's more development on the west side. Certainly more development on the south side of San Antonio as well. And likewise, there is this resurgence at the urban core of San Antonio, which is pretty close to where Euclid lies. So it was really heartening to see that little road with this really unusual name that apparently, is the name of a street in a lot of places around the country, that this little stretch of road would represent the city around it. And I think, yes, it represents a lot of the challenges that the city is facing, especially in terms of change, obviously in terms of gentrification. And, part of that does come with an older generation passing and a newer generation taking over. But again, it was so heartening to see that this younger generation that is moving into that street and consequently is fueling the city at large really wants to preserve what made San Antonio what it is today and its history. So I am so glad to see that on this 2-mile stretch of road, that it really is sort of like the pulse of the city at large.
And thank you to San Antonio Express News staff writer René Guzman for joining me for today's episode of the In-Depth Podcast, an interview program from expressnews.com. For the San Antonio Express News, I'm Chance Dorland.